Let's talk about your paycheck. It shows up in your bank account, and you see that final number. But if you ever really stop to think about the story that number is telling, because trust me, it's not random. It's this fascinating mix of big economic ideas, really important laws, and smart company strategy. And today, we're going to decode that story together.
I mean, that's the big question, right? Why that specific number? Is it based on what you need to live, what you actually produce for the company, or just what the law says? Well, we are going to unravel that exact mystery piece by piece.
So, here's our game plan. First, we'll break down what pay even is. Then, we'll dive into the big theories that shape how wages work. After that, we'll cover the laws that keep things fair, see how companies actually build their pay systems, and finally, we'll look at how they use money to reward a job well done.
All right, let's dive right in. Before we can get into the complicated why, we need to be totally clear on the what. So let's start by breaking down the basic building blocks of what you get paid.
You know, when we think of pay, our minds usually jump straight to our basic salary. But that's just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. Your total compensation is actually a whole package. It's got things like allowances, maybe for housing or travel, and incentives like bonuses. And of course, there are the super important benefits, like health insurance or paid vacation. It's the whole shebang that really tells the full story.
And this is a really crucial point to make. We all want a job that makes us happy, right? But that feeling, that job satisfaction, it isn't a line item on your pay stub. When we're talking about compensation, we're focusing on the tangible stuff, the financial rewards and benefits you get, not the purely psychological ones.
Okay, so now that we know the what, let's get into the really fascinating part, the why. We're shifting gears from the components of your paycheck to the powerful ideas and theories that have shaped wages for, well, centuries.
This is pretty much the oldest and most basic idea out there, the subsistence theory. And honestly, it's a pretty stark concept. It basically argues that wages will naturally find their level at the absolute bare minimum a worker needs to just survive and keep the workforce going. Nothing more, nothing less.
Thankfully, thinking evolved beyond that pretty harsh idea. The standard of living theory is basically a direct answer to it. It says, hey, wait a minute. Wages shouldn't just be about keeping people alive. They should be high enough to support a decent, respectable lifestyle. This is where you see the idea of social well-being really start to enter the conversation.
So you can see the night and day difference here. On one side, it's all about pure physical survival. On the other, it's about social well-being, about being able to actually participate in society. It's the huge shift from asking, can you live, to can you live well?
Then you've got this purely economic take on things, the marginal productivity theory. This one strips away the social stuff and argues that your wage should be directly tied to the value you create. If your work adds an extra $1,000 of value to the company, your pay should reflect that. It's simple, really. The more value you produce, the more you stand to earn.
Now, theories are great for understanding the big picture, but in the real world, there are rules. So let's move on and see how actual laws add a super important layer of protection and structure right on top of all these ideas.
This brings us to a really famous piece of legislation. Why was this act so important back then, and why is it still so important today? What exactly was it designed to do?
Its purpose was crystal clear: to create a legal safety net, a wage floor for certain jobs. This act makes sure employers can't pay workers less than a legally required minimum, which directly protects people from being taken advantage of and helps them maintain a basic standard of living. So, what's with this number 20 plus? Well, that number is the magic threshold for the Payment of Bonus Act of 1965. This law says that if a company has 20 or more employees, it has to pay them a bonus, which is usually tied to how profitable the company is. It's basically a law that formalizes the idea of sharing in the company's success.
And this is a powerful, absolutely essential principle that was written into law. The Equal Remuneration Act takes gender pay discrimination head-on. The rule couldn't be simpler or more just. For the same job, or a really similar job, the pay has to be equal, period.
So we've got theories and we've got laws, but how does an actual company put all this together? Let's switch from the why to the how and look at the practical ways companies build fair and logical pay systems right from the ground up.
I mean, think about it. The work an engineer does is totally different from what a salesperson does, which is totally different from an HR manager. So how does a company figure out what each of those roles is worth compared to the others? How do they make sure it's fair inside their own walls?
Well, the answer is they don't just guess. There's a whole process for this called job evaluation. Companies will systematically compare all the different jobs, and they'll look at things like the level of skill needed, the amount of physical or mental effort involved, and the degree of responsibility. Doing that allows them to build a fair internal pay structure where the money you make really aligns with the demands of your job.
Okay, we're on to our final section. Once that fair structure is in place, how do companies use pay to actually drive great results? This is where compensation stops being a fixed cost and starts being a dynamic tool for motivation.
And this is where performance-linked pay comes into play. The idea is really simple. Create a direct line between what you achieve and what you earn. By tying pay to results you can actually measure, companies make sure everybody's focused on what matters and is motivated to bring their A game.
And this kind of motivation really comes in two main flavors. You've got your monetary incentives, that's the direct cash we all know, like sales commissions or performance bonuses. But non-monetary incentives can be just as powerful, if not more so. Things like public recognition, getting an award, or even just some simple, sincere praise. Those things tap into our human need for appreciation and status, and they can be huge motivators.
So let's zoom out and put it all together. What is pay? Well, we learned it's a total package. Salary, benefits, the works. Why is it set where it is? That's a mix of big economic ideas and important legal protections. And how do companies manage it all? Through smart job evaluation and by using pay to reward amazing performance.
So, the next time you look at your paycheck, I hope you see more than just a number. I hope you see its story. A story about economics, about the law, about company strategy, and at the end of the day, a story about the value of what you do. So what story does yours tell?